we will begin. So we would like to thank Etta and Ron Laxer and family for sponsoring this class. And I'm guessing that it is in honor of Batya and me. My guess is because we hosted the family of 12 the day after the Seder. But I want to assure you that if you happen to come to Israel and you do look us up and we host you, you do not have to feel obligated to sponsor a class. It was indeed our pleasure.
No obligation.
Okay, so thank you. I'm immediately sharing our screen. And if last week we talked about the fine cold syndrome, and some might have felt that that did not sound particularly Israeli-like or Jewish-like, I'd like to put forth the other extreme through some pictures of what we experienced this past week. And what you see in this first one is an example, together with this picture, of two incidents of many of people on the road having to quickly get out of their cars as rockets were shot. And in both of these pictures, strangers came to help protect children. And I repeat, strangers. In this case, two soldiers happened to see this little boy by himself. He had quickly gotten out of the car, and a parent was trying to get the baby. And in the meantime, the little boy ran by himself, and two soldiers who were walking quickly came to protect him. And in this case, there was a father protecting his infant, and a stranger just came to protect. And this was something that was going on all the time. What this says is a little village called Pesa흐 in a place, I don't know, maybe about 45 minutes outside of Yerushalayim, Rosh Ayin, that is a community that is home to people who have disabilities but want to be able to live on their own. They were opening up their facilities during this period for people who live down south and inviting them to come at no expense to be able to take advantage of their activities for people with special needs. This is a picture of a couple who was supposed to get married down south, but couldn't because of the situation. And so many different places offered them to come get married up in the center of the country or up north. And that is just a different type of syndrome. Okay. So as we explore in today's session insights of pluralism from within Pirkei Avot, let's begin with this question. Our tradition rests on both, and I'd like you to try to complete it. Just one word and a second word. What immediately comes to mind? Our tradition rests on both blank and blank. What are the first two words that come to mind? There are no words for wrong. Let me see your hands. Anyone?
Okay. If we relate to what you said, הכנסת אורחים.
Okay, hospitality and
I don't know.
okay, Mel? Mel, can you unmute yourself?
Gemilut Chasadim.
Okay, so that's hospitality is part of Gemilut Chesed, acts of kindness. Zipporah?
Remembering.
Okay.
Remembering.
So remembering, all of these are correct, but I'm giving you a hint by saying there are two blanks there that I'm trying to balance, that it rests on this and this. What you said are true, but two things that perhaps are a bit in contrast. Anybody else?
How about nationalism and religion?
Okay, nationalism and religion, contrasting them. Okay, Claudette, I believe. Anybody
Yes,
else?
I say Torah, Frida,
Frida, Torah and, you got to have an and.
and what they said.
And what they said, okay. That what they said, I believe, is all in the Torah.
Yeah.
They said.
So,
Okay.
טוב ורע.
Tovara, good and bad. Interesting answer.
Religion is Torah.
Religion is Torah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to, for the sake of what we're leading into, I'm going to say our tradition rests on preservation and now think of what the next word would be. Preserving, keeping things from the past.
And continuation.
Well, preserving would be continuing. So what else would it be? I think I heard somebody say it.
Renewal.
Renewal or creativity. Yes, very good. Okay, so let's look at our first text from Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Zakkai, had 5 disciples. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus, Rabbi Yoshua, the son of Hananiah, Rabbi Yosei the Kohen, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Netanel, and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Arach. He would recount their praises. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus, is a cemented cistern that loses not a drop. Rabbi Yoshua, the son of Hananiah, fortunate is she who gave birth to him. Rabbi Yosei the Kohen, a chassid, pious one. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Netanel, fears sin. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is an ever-increasing wellspring. Now, the two I highlighted, to be brief, are the two that he favored. Now, what is the difference between them? He talks very poetically. What is a cemented cistern that loses not a drop? He remembers everything. He remembers every single thing, holds on to it, as opposed to Rabbi Elazar, who is an ever-increasing wellspring that he creates and he renews. Now, our tradition rests on both of these. But if Rabbi Yochanan had to choose one of them, who would he have chosen if he needed one of them to take over for him? Now, we have to remember that Yochanan ben Zakkai lived at the time of the destruction of the temple, and things in the Torah community were falling apart. So who do you think he would think would be the better choice to take over? The one who wanted just to preserve things as they were, take all the broken pieces and put them together, or take Elazar ben Arach and recreate new? Which one? Marlene?
Oh, she's muted.
Mute. Marlene, we don't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Forgot I have two things to do now, raise my hand and unmute. I think he would choose the creative person because what they had wasn't working. So therefore, the creative person had much of this knowledge, maybe not all of it, but certainly was schooled and was willing to move forward with the knowledge that he had and create something that would work in the circumstances.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Everybody agree with Marlene?
Yes.
Yes.
Anybody disagree? Okay. All right. Let's look at the rest of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan used to say, if all the sages of Israel were to be in one cup of a balance scale, and Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus, were in the other, he would outweigh them all. Another rabbi, Abba Shaul, said in his name, if all the sages of Israel were to be in one cup of a balance scale, Eliezer, the son of Hyrcanus included, and Elazar, the son of Arach, were in the other, he would outweigh them all. So in other words, it's unresolved. However, if we look at the very next Mishnah, we get a sense of who, in fact, Yochanan did prefer. Now, I'm going to read this quickly. Rabbi Yochanan said to them, to these 5 disciples, go and see which is the best trait for a person to acquire. Said Rabbi Eliezer, a good eye. Said Rabbi Yoshua, a good friend. Said Rabbi Yosef, a good neighbor. Said Rabbi Shimon, to see what is born out of one's actions. Said Rabbi Elazar, a good heart. Said Rabbi Yochanan to them, I prefer the words of Elazar, the son of Arach, to yours, for his words include all of yours. If you have a good heart, that includes all of it. Then he said to them, go and see which is the worst trait, the one that a person should most distance himself from. Said Rabbi Eliezer, an evil eye, said Rabbi Yoshua, an evil friend, said Rabbi Yosef, an evil neighbor, said Rabbi Shimon, to borrow and not to repay, for one who borrows from man is as one who borrows from the Almighty. As it stated, the wicked man borrows and does not repay, but the righteous one is benevolent and gives. Said Rabbi Elazar, an evil heart. Said Rabbi Yochanan to them, I prefer the word of Elazar, the son of Arach, to yours, for his words include all of yours. So we have a sense that Yochanan prefers who? Elazar ben Arach.
Yeah.
However, that's not necessarily going to last. I want you to look at these words before we read a very interesting perspective on this Elazar ben Arach by a Talmudist. Look at the word chadash. Even if you don't read Hebrew, you can see that the key letters are chet, daled, shin, repeated in these 4 words. So you have chadash, which means new, chadshanut, which means innovation. Chidush is like you study something and you've studied it 50 years and suddenly you study it from and you finally come up with something, a chidush, and that's important for our context. And chodesh we know means month. Okay, so we have Miriam Gedweiser, Talmudist and educator, says the following. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was respected by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but suddenly we don't hear from him again in the Mishnah. And in fact, Eliezer becomes more prominent. But something very interesting happens. Eliezer is excommunicated ultimately because he tends not to follow the majority opinion. And let's see what happens with Elazar. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach happened upon Deom Set, a place with high quality waters. After Jerusalem was destroyed, most of the people went to Yavne. But Elazar went to a place that was beautiful, but there really weren't any other Torah scholars. And you can guess that that would be a problem. If you want to be able to study with other people, you've got to have other people there to keep your mind alert, etc., etc. Keep that in mind. He was drawn after the waters and stayed there. His learning was uprooted. When he returned, he came and got up to read from a Sefer Torah. He should have read, "This month is for you. HaChodesh hazeh lachem." Instead of saying, HaChodesh hazeh lachem with the Daled, he said, their heart is mute. HaCharesh haya libam. The rabbis asked for mercy on his behalf and his learning returned. You see how the Resh and the Daled are very similar. So instead of reading HaChodesh, he read HaCharesh. And that's a terrible mistake. And a scholar like him should not have made that mistake. But if you haven't been practicing, the great Rabbi Elazar ben Arach had fallen so far that he misread the first mitzvah in the Torah, confusing one letter in each word to deliver an entirely different meaning. Now this is the important part, did Rabbi Elazar's zeal for newness and creativity drive him away from his colleagues in search for ever sweeter water? Is this story criticizing his creative approach in favor of the conservatism of Rabbi Eliezer? The Imre Emes, Rabbi Avraham Mordechai Alter of Gur, has a fascinating approach that in fact suggests the opposite. Commenting on Parshat HaChodesh, he explains that renewal and newness are essential to the missions of Jews in the world. The mitzvah of HaChodesh, which connects to hit chadshut, renewal, means that without Torah, we would be stuck in the physical world and its routines. The Torah instead asks us to renew our approach to Torah and God regularly. The month renews every 30 days to remind us that even in our religious lives, we should not get stuck in routines. That's why Rosh Chodesh is so important. People don't think of it as a Chag, but it really is. In the same way that Shabbat, even though it's every week, it's an opportunity for renewal. Torah and mitzvot, according to the Imrei Emes, should raise us above the natural world and help us raise it with us, something that becomes impossible if observance itself becomes, in his words, second nature. So Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, the ever-strengthening fountain, understood this well, which is why he was a font of creativity. He understood it, that is, until he didn't. Rabbi Elazar was eventually drawn in by sweet waters that represent the comforts of the physical world. HaChodesh, the innovation, Chodesh, Chadash, Chadshanut, that is the heart of Torah, and HaCharesh, the blockage, that is routine, can slip into each other before you notice. Just remove the small edge of the letter Dalet, and it becomes a Resh. Now, despite the dangers inherent in Rabbi Elazar ben Arach's power of innovation, Chidush, his colleagues still prayed for him and welcomed him back to their fold. Both cistern and spring are necessary, but neither is sufficient on its own. Now, there's a notion that somehow, somewhere in the modern age, has perhaps been lost, that goes back to this time of the rabbis in Pirkei Avot, which is in the rabbinic age, that is sensed that the rabbis then and God himself anticipated that they couldn't know everything that was going to come about in the future, and therefore God was looking for sages to take over and base what they interpreted on his original givings and interpret it, not put that aside in light of what was going on in the particular age. And so, our first reading, I think we're all familiar with the great Orthodox Rav Moshe Feinstein, Noam Zion, the great Jerusalem educator. He writes, Rav Moshe Feinstein asks rhetorically, is there an end and boundary to Torah? In other words, we have to be creative, like Elazar said. God forbid, Rav Moshe Feinstein says, if we rule only according to what is written in books, what shall we do when questions arise whose answers are not found in the books? Certainly, even now in our time, Torah can grow. People who studied in the Melton program and studied ethics and modern medical issues should be familiar with his name, realizing that issues came up there that couldn't have possibly been imagined in those times. Certainly, even now in our time, Torah can grow. Even if we rule according to what is written, we cannot rule just because it says so, but because of its rational appeal. Next, to echo this from the Midrash, what did God do when the 40 days on Mount Sinai were finished? God gave the Torah as a gift to Moshe. But how could Moshe learn the whole Torah in 40 days, the Midrash asks, when the Torah is described as longer than the earth and wider than the ocean? The answer is that God only taught Moshe the general principles. Third, Joseph Albo, a Spanish philosopher, echoes this as well. It is logically impossible for God's Torah to be complete in the sense that it offers detailed rules for all cases. For the individual situations are constantly changing and are too numerous to be included in any book. Therefore, God gave Moshe the general principles hinted at in the Torah, so that the wise of every generation could derive the ever new particulars. And that's why the term, it's just occurring to me, when we say our sages, we say chachamim, but the really correct term is talmidei chachamim, meaning that the chachamim are meant to be students as well, constantly studying. So now we're going to continue with a pair that we're more familiar with, Hillel and Shammai. Any dispute that is for the sake of heaven, machloket l'shem shamayim, is destined to endure, meaning the results will be worth. One that is not for the sake of heaven is not desired or destined, to endure. Which is a dispute that is for the sake of heaven? The dispute between Hillel and Shammai. And which is a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven? The dispute of Korach and all his company. Now, what's the difference between that? That a dispute, l'shem shamayim, is where both sides, they're not disputing, disagreeing because they're looking for power. One wants to be right. They're sincerely looking to come up with the right answer. It's not that I want to be better than you. Korach wanted to be the right one and wanted to get rid of Moshe. So l'shem shamayim, and that's something that our tradition encourages. To even argue, but for a good reason. Because we know that if you do argue with a proper motivation, it can help make you understand something you haven't till this understand, clarify something, make you both think of something that's never been understood before. If that's the purpose, not to put somebody else down, and if you're both really listening. Okay, so now, so certainly the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud, is telling us that debates, and that means that people are thinking differently, are encouraged. Now, this is very interesting. A simple example, and you're probably familiar with this, of one of the debates. And by the way, Hillel and Shammai, between themselves, they had a few disagreements, but it was really their disciples that had most of them. And they must have had around 300 disagreements. So, what do you do when you're in front of a bride? And let's say she isn't particularly beautiful. Although they say there is never a bride that isn't beautiful because she's glowing, right? Okay. But they're discussing this, Hillel and Shammai. One recites praise of the bride as she is, emphasizing her good qualities. Beth Hillel says one recites a fair and attractive bride, whether she is or whether she isn't. Beit Shammai says to Beit Hillel, well, in a case where the bride was lame or blind or not pretty, does one say with regard to her, a fair and attractive bride? How can you do that? The Torah states, keep you from a false matter. So, what is Hillel concerned with, and what is Shammai concerned with? And does anybody agree with Shammai?
No. Shammai is looking for the surface in many ways. And he's looking for only truth, whereas Hillel is looking for Rahmanas, perhaps, concern for the bride. And in the groom's eyes, the bride is always beautiful.
Okay. I don't know. Is he just concerned about the bride, or maybe he's also concerned? The groom might say, so you saw the bride? How does she look? Maybe he's a little nervous, and is this the time to make the groom, yes. Marlene, you got to get used to doing two things.
I know, I'm doing two things at once. I think that Shammai was the conservator. He was the one that wanted to stick to, he was the fundamentalist. He wanted to stick to the letter of the law, and whatever was said in the Torah, that's what he was going to follow, with no ifs, ands, buts, or maybes. Whereas Hillel was more concerned about relationships between God and man and man, and felt that it was more important to preserve the dignity of another person.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Shammai, just to say something on his behalf, was concerned about losing traditionalists, because he was seeing people going another way. But you have that sense, because he was known to be very strict. Absolutely. And we're going to tell a story in a moment that we're all familiar with that paints him that way. Yes. But he was concerned in a way similar to Moshe, as opposed to Aaron, with the letter of the law, as opposed to Hillel, who was concerned psychologically, like Aaron, with the makeup of the human being. Absolutely. Anybody else?
But I think why they say that these two rabbis argue, and it was for the sake of heaven, is because they both make a point. Both things were important.
For sure. No. Absolutely. And again, that they were both genuinely believed in what they were doing for the right reason. Absolutely. Absolutely, Claudette. Yeah. Okay. And we'll say more about that as we go on now. Okay. Looking at this. Micha Goodman, who we've studied in the past, says the following. Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, okay, building on what Marlene just said, represent two different Jewish ways of thinking. And both currents can be found pulsating throughout the history of Jewish thought. For Beit Shammai, humans are sinful creatures whose feelings must be overridden by the word of the Bible. They need it. But that should be Beit Hillel, humans are transcendental creatures who must listen to their own senses and understand through them the verses of the Bible. What he's saying there is, we are meant to interpret the Bible, and how are we going to interpret it is through our own personality. Just like, we read the Parsha every single year. And anyone who has to give a Dvar Torah about the Parsha, I'm sure from time to time there are going to be similarities in that Dvar Torah. But certainly, from year to year, it's going to be different based on what's going on in the world, what's going on in yourself, and that you're going to be reading that and you're going to interpret it based on that. And bottom line is that it's believed by people like Noam Sion and Micha Goodman that that's what God intended when he started this transmission from him to Moshe down to us. Okay, now, and to bring this home, Micha Goodman reminds us of two experiences in Hillel's life. When he's young, so he was poor, and you didn't have to pay much, but if you don't have, you don't have. And he wanted to go into the house of study, the Beit Midrash, and it was the winter time, and the gatekeeper would not let him in. He would not despair, and he climbed up to the roof, even though it was snowing, and he managed to listen through the chimney. So that was one story. The second story, remember the non-Jew who first goes to Shammai and he asks him to teach him the whole Torah while standing on one foot. And Shammai rejects him. So, how do these two stories impact on Hillel and make him somebody who becomes a pluralist? Anybody want to try to answer that before I share how Micha?
I'm just thinking that from his own experience, he doesn't want anybody to be rejected. He felt perhaps rejected by the guard at the door, and he doesn't want anybody else to have to go through that kind of an experience.
Absolutely. Yep. That was enough to do it to him. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, think of when you disagree with somebody. Now, you don't have to say anything. But how often do you disagree with someone and deep down you believe you're right and she or he is wrong? And how often do you disagree and you say, you know what, we disagree, and maybe I'm right and maybe you're right? Think about that for a second. And we touched on that for a moment last week. So the next point that we're going to discuss now is not only did Hillel and Shammai disagree, but God indicates that Elu ve'elu, both are right. Now, there's a lengthy text here, but sometimes I decide I have to share it with you because I could not say it better. And it's okay. Daniel Roth has been very involved with a project on conflict resolution. And machloket matters. And he brings forth the following. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shmuel, for 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel argued. One asserted, the law agrees with our views, and the other asserted, the law agrees with our views. The voice of God came down and announced, they are both the words of the living God. But the law agrees with Beit Hillel, meaning both are right, but when it comes down to saying what the law is going to be, you have to decide according to somebody, right? Since both were the words of the living God, what entitled Beit Hillel to have the law agree with them? Only for one reason, because they were kind and modest. They studied their own rulings and those of Beit Shammai. And not only that, but they mentioned the rulings of Beit Shammai before their own. Okay, meaning, and if you look at the Talmud, and that's what makes the Talmud more interesting than the Shulchan Aruch, that you've got not only the laws that we are meant to abide by, but you also have the minority opinion. That says a lot. First of all, you never know that maybe in a different time we'll ultimately follow that other opinion. But here it's saying Hillel always listened to Shammai, and they always quoted them first. So that was common decency. So that was a reason to go by them. Okay, now, Roth says the following, very, very significant here. Pluralism can't be that you're just compromising for the sake of peace. The rabbis are conveying a much deeper idea than simply saying that God's word can be legitimately interpreted in different ways. They are saying that God stands behind different and conflicting opinions which both authentically represent and transmit the word of God. There is not a single opinion which can be ascribed to God Here is explicit acceptance of the idea that there can be conflicting ideas which are both right in God's eyes. The interpretive process is justified and contrary opinions are given equal validity. The rabbis weren't trying to create a superficial society of compromisers. In other words, it's not that the rabbis wanted us to simply compromise our truths for the sake of peace. They actually held that our opponent's truth, even though it contradicts our truth, is an equally valid expression of God's will. This is a much deeper way of relating to an opponent. It lends infinitely more integrity to one's opponent than simply saying, I'll put up with you for the sake of the unity of this community. Clearly, the rabbi's agenda is to create a pluralistic community in which Jews who hold opposing opinions deeply respect their opponents' positions. The diverse and pluralistic nature of the Jewish people was elevated to an expression of God's will. The interpretive process and kosher argument became a reflection of God's very nature. They were trying to make the potentially splintered Jewish community a cohesive one by making pluralism of interpretation a divine value. They are saying that just because one side wins an argument doesn't mean the other side is wrong. Now, where this gets complicated is this is theory, but when you have to decide on a law and put it into action, and that law has to be for a wide, broad community, that can be difficult. And we're not going to get into that right now. And those are issues that come up, I guess, in a country that's trying to run on its own. In a country where you have different denominations and there doesn't have to be national observance, it's a little different. But these are the original ideas that have to be examined again somehow.
It's a very important lesson for the world right now. For almost every nation in the world, that they take a look at this, because there are just too many people in the world who only look at one side and totally reject everything else that doesn't agree with them. It's such an important lesson.
Yes.
The key here is respect. I think Hillel and Shammai had respect for the knowledge that they both had. And somehow or the other, we have lost that respect for each other, and we don't listen anymore.
No, it's true. Despite the differences that they had on matters of marriage, they had marriages between their two families. The differences that they held on issues like ritual uncleanness in actual life, they borrowed and lent vessels. I picture between their homes, they would borrow vessels, which, I don't know, I see that as something very real. What that's meant to say to us. Okay, just a little more. he goes on to bring, there's a pasuk in the Torah that says that the Jerusalem Talmud elaborates upon, that the Jerusalem Talmud says that when asked by Moshe for a clear-cut Torah, God responded by saying, Acharei Rabim Lahatot, go according to the majority. If the majority rules someone is acquitted, they are acquitted. If they rule the person is convicted, they are convicted. In order that the law should be studied with 49 reasons to rule a matter impure and with 49 reasons to rule it pure. This means that every law must be understood with 49 reasons to rule a matter one way and 49 reasons to rule the opposite. Now, this is great. A vote should then follow. If the majority vote, a matter is pure, it is pure. And if they vote, it is impure, it is impure. Understanding the 49 vs 49 was not only for Moshe and the sages of the Sanhedrin to do, but according to the Midrash, even young children in the times of King David were taught how to do so in any aspect of Torah. Rabbi Yom Tov ben Avraham Asebli, commentator in Seville, Spain, known as the Rifta, explained that this is how we can understand the legend of the heavenly voice declaring that both the opinions of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai are the words of the living God. Though they hold contradictory positions, the Babylonian Talmud states that there are 50 gates of wisdom, and Moshe was only revealed 49 of them. Therefore, no human, not even Moses, can obtain the absolute truth of 50. Now, being able to grasp the contradictory 49 vs 49 on any particular subject can be extremely challenging, especially if we are affected personally. It requires several particular traits. First is self-awareness of our own 49 reasons that brought us to our particular understanding of truth. What various experiences and people contributed to our interpretations of the truth as such. Second is a deep sense of humility that our truth is at best a partial truth based upon only 49 reasons and never reaches the absolute truth of 50. Once we have acquired awareness of the bias of our own 49, we need to acknowledge the 49 experiences, stories, concerns, and values that make up our opponent's understanding of truth. In order to fully enter into this opposing position, we must cultivate a genuine sense of kavod, respect for our opponents. We also need sakranut, curiosity about the 49 reasons and experiences that bring them to their understanding of the truth. This requires deep listening and a degree of empathy. Grasping the contradictory 49 vs 49 of a difficult issue enables us to engage in a process of constructive disagreement for the sake of heaven, known as machloket l'shem shamayim, as well as constructive communication, known as tochacha. This method, practiced by the sages of the Mishnah and Talmud, is still practiced today every time study partners or chevruta respectfully argue over different interpretations of a text. I think he says there beautifully of really understanding why you have attained the truth you have, how you've come to it, and then trying to understand why your opponent has arrived at the truth he or she has.
Mhm.
And the last Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, Yossi ben Yoezer says, may your home be a place for scholars to meet, and one should be mitavek in the dust at their feet and drink thirstily their words. We've said that there is a tradition of sitting on the floor at the dust of their feet. Avak is dust, but it also means to wrestle. And this idea of really looking for the truth and not just accepting. Chaim Volozhin in the 1800s says the following, to close with this. It is forbidden for a student to accept the words of his master if he has critical questions about them, kushiyot. For sometimes the student has the truth, and the student can be like a twig that ignites a log. The student can, by challenging the teacher, push him to great enlightenment. Thus, we wrestle the great holy rabbis who live on earth as well as those whose souls are in heaven, the great authors whose books we have, for we have permission to wrestle with them and make war with their words and to resolve the difficulties in their views. We shall not give deference to personages, but we shall only love truth. Remember, we said that we're not looking to idolize a person, but he says here, love the truth. However, we as students must be careful not to speak in arrogance when one finds something to dispute. Do not imagine yourself as great as your master teacher or as the author of the book against which you are raising objections. Know that sometimes you have not understood the teacher or author's intent, so maintain great humility. Say to yourself that even though I am an unworthy, this is a matter of Torah, and I must wrestle, but only under conditions that remain in the dust of their feet. That is, with an attitude of humility and deference, arguing before them from my position on the ground.
Mhm.
And I want to close. There is a bracha that one says, and this is taken from the Midrash, if one sees many thousands of people, one should say, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, wise one who knows secrets. Just as their faces are different from one another's, so too their understandings are different, for each one has a different understanding. And so too Moshe requested from God when he died. He said, Master of the universe, every person's thoughts are known and revealed before you, and none of your children's thoughts are similar to another's. When I die, please appoint a leader who can sustain them from all according to their own understanding. Now, where did I take this particular paragraph from? From Freedom of Expression and Protection of Minority Rights in Jewish Law, Mishpat Ivri, by Professor Menachem Elon, who was not just a professor of law, but was on the Supreme Court. He died, I believe, in 2012. And this is part of the discussion now of what's going on and how much our Supreme Court should be looking at Jewish law in our court system. But this is a case for issues of today were discussed way back when. Just as I also have made the point that I think the Tanakh spoke of women, gave women positions that the rabbis later on brought down. It all has to be re-examined in some way. Would anybody like to say anything else on this subject?
I just
Yeah,
want to say
yes.
thank you for this very enlightening, challenging study.
Okay, so Bev, when we get off, you're going to share this with the world, right? Bev, did you do it already? Okay. Oh, you're still there.
I'm
Esther,
still here.
Yeah, I was wondering if the sages, what your thoughts are on this, if the sages kept in mind that they had a responsibility of being a light unto the nations. And very much the way an older sibling has an extra responsibility when making a decision, that they're a role model, that even if something seemed okay for them, it might be viewed by someone else in a different way, if it colored at all their decision.
It's an interesting question.
Because there's certain things that when you have Hillel and Shammai arguing, they're arguing within the realms of Torah law, but we're also supposed to be a light unto the nations, and where there's not quite that understanding necessarily with other nations and how they would view our activities, our behavior, and if there's an extra element you have to worry about in both following Jewish law, following Torah, and understanding that practices are different elsewhere, and that we're a role model.
Well, can you give an example of what you would be thinking they would do that you would be nervous about the world seeing?
Well, I don't know if in terms of, well, even the democracy issue, I mean, the whole world is so upside down. The way, Israel's not viewed as a democracy, and the infighting going on in Israel right now is questionable in terms of whether, a democracy decision was accepted, etc. That's not really a clear-cut point, because, the constitutions of, like, say, the United States, Canada, were based on the Bible precepts, but they're not being followed right now. And so whenever decisions are made by Jewish law, we have to follow Torah, but I wonder if we have to take into account not just the sensibilities of our own nation, but how this is going to be viewed in light of the opinions of the outside world, because we are to be a light unto the nations, that we have a responsibility to explain very clearly, what our position is with people who do not follow Torah law.
Well, I think that from the beginning of time, we've been concerned about that. When I would teach younger people, much younger people, sections in the Torah about charging interest. So, between us, we were not supposed to charge interest, but you would to non-Jews. So, of course, there would be a loud cry that was racist. And I'd have to explain, no. That was the way of the world. And so we were just trying to be part of the world and go along with their rules. That's just a simple example.
Well, I was wondering if actually in any of the arguments, when you heard debating, if that issue came up. I just don't know. If ever they would discuss not just Torah law, but what was going on in the world and extra precautions. Almost like, it seemed to me like Shammai was looking, I would imagine, as decisions being a siyag around the Torah. That if you interpret something not strictly to the letter of the law, then people might have a tendency to start being very creative about the law in other respects. And that's, so in his mind, it might have been a siyag around the Torah.
That's actually part of what we'll be discussing next week when we talk about the balance of study and practice. Some of that will come in there. But of course, the rabbis, that comes up with Yochanan ben Zakkai when he flees to Yavne and their relationship with the Romans. Of course, it had to be an issue of how they dealt with the outside world, for sure. For sure. And as far as me as the eldest of my siblings, I don't know how to answer that. There was nothing I did that I had to be nervous about being a bad role model, except maybe being too conservative.
But you're aware of the fact that you don't even realize sometimes. Something came up recently with, I'm the third of 4 children, but was very much the person who took care of my younger sister. And she made a comment recently about, I had never told her that I had done something, like I'd gone to the library weekly and she wasn't aware of it, as if accusatory that I should have been teaching her that. And it made me very aware of my role as an elder sibling, which I never really thought about.
Oh,
That it was very, I was so surprised at the comment, and I realized how much she really followed much of what I did because we were the closest siblings. So it was interesting.
yeah. Yeah, well, I guess, yeah. You realize the responsibility when you're older, I guess. Anybody else?
Bracha, I think there's a few sort of key phrases that we really should glean from today's discussion. And one of them is, I mean, unfortunately, I think the world today follows the edict, it's either my way or the highway, you know, as you say in slang terms, like you want it all. But I think we also have to learn that it's not a sign of weakness to say we have to agree to disagree, because there are many instances in your life, and I find this particularly talking to my children as they were growing up, who had different ideas about things in the world. And even till today, sometimes I'll say something and they'll say, oh, mom, you know, I get the old mom. But there are times when you just cannot come, you could use, you're talking 49 reasons for either a positive or negative thinking. You could come up with 100 reasons and still not agree. So sometimes you have to really put a time limit on the discussion and say, you know what, I think we really have to agree to disagree. And there will be things in the world that people will disagree upon.
No, but I think what he was trying to say is that you have legitimate reason for arriving at your reason for thinking that, and give the other person perhaps the same right to feel that his or her reason is legitimate also.
Well, I think when you use that term to agree to disagree, that you really are showing that there is worthiness in both sides of the argument.
You know, unless it's really something that's just, you know, ridiculous.
Then you just say, you're doing it because I'm the mother.
I haven't used that. I don't know if I don't think I've ever.
You know what? There are sometimes, especially, you know, with little kids, like you tell them, you know, don't do this, and they'll say why, and because, you know, you'll just say because I told you not to do it. You know, like doesn't go any further than that. But as your children get older and as they become adults, they are going to have some different worldviews than you do. And if you enter into discussion with them, you have to be prepared to agree to disagree.
Okay. I'll try it tomorrow.
One of the beauty of the rabbis agreeing and discussion and disagreeing is that today there's awful lot of learning that is coming out from those discussions, whether it was whether they agreed with each other or not, but there's a lot of learning that is coming out of it.
Yeah, and that's what the whole idea, remember last year or 2 years ago already, told the story of 2 rabbis and his learning partner died, and they brought him somebody else that they thought that he would love learning with. And he said, no, because all he does is agree with me. I want somebody who's going to make me think, by questioning.
Right.
Yeah.
There's lots of learning in listening to the opposite view.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Mhm.
How was your Shabbat? You had a guest, Rabbi Nevins? Yes? No? Didn't you? Wasn't that this Shabbat? Nobody was there?
It was.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
it was a very interesting discussion.
Okay. All right.
It's on YouTube in case anyone missed it. You can watch it then. Watch it there.
So I can't decide if I should or I shouldn't by the reaction.
Oh, you probably should. Because I think what he said, some of it was a little bit, it's Brenda, a little bit more.
I know your voice, Brenda.
Okay, because I didn't put my picture on. A little bit more liberal, perhaps, than some of the members of the congregation.
It's pluralistic congregation, is it not?
Yes, but there were people that certainly disagreed with his perspective.
Ooh. Okay. All right.
Sounds like a challenge to thinking.
And we agreed to disagree.
I think I
Right.
have to watch this. Yeah.
Okay. All right. He taught Aliza, is that her name?
And Grover,
Ann Grover?
yeah, he was
So you
there.
talk about your Rabbi Grover?
Yeah.
Not Rabbi Grover?
Rabbi Grover and
Brenda.
rabbis.
Brenda, I do not recognize your voice.
Well, you said Aliza.
Well, that's nicer than, I forgot her last name. I haven't even met her. Okay. All right. I know, you used to say Fader. I know.
Yes, Rabbi Silberstein is very well worth meeting. Bracha.
Okay. 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 All right. All right. Well, I hope it warms up. That's ridiculous. 4 degrees. Okay.
Friday, it's supposed to go up to 20, so we're just on a teeter-totter.
All right. Be well.
Yes,
Thank you.
Be
Take
safe.
care.
Thank
Okay.
you so much.